Hello viewers, Super GT here. Welcome to a video on KartKraft. Now this is of course a kart game. It was announced a fair few years ago, went off the radar for a while, and it's resurfaced. We have a version to play here. At the beginning of November it kind of surfaced again. So £14 on Steam is what I've paid for it here. Not too much, but then again there isn't too much content. There's just three circuits at the moment. The first of which we're going to be playing here is PF International in the UK. So one thing I would say is that this game is being updated a lot and fairly frequently at the moment. So the version I'm playing here and the things I say might be different compared to what you play at a different time. But anyway, quickly onto the sound. Just a quick note on the sound. The sound is really good. I was really impressed by the sound, and you'll notice as you go under the tunnel here at PF, the echo and the reverb is amazing. Really impressed by the way it sounded. As soon as you put those headphones on, whack up the volume, it did feel very good. The graphics also I was really impressed by. One of the best looking kart games I've seen. The modelling of this track, I've not been to PF, but I've seen plenty of videos of it, and I can imagine that it actually does look similar to how it would in reality. It is laser scanned, so you would expect it to be very, very close, but from the videos I've seen of PF, it does look very good. The physics is the main thing in any kart game, I think. The physics are really difficult to get right, because of course a kart is nothing like a car. The way it handles is just absolutely phenomenal. It's very twitchy. The steering amount you need is minimal. You barely need to really turn a steering wheel in a go-kart. Not much more than, like you see I've just turned 90 degrees there, but you don't really turn any more than that. In fact, the kart won't really even do that anyway. So that is something that is really difficult to get right in a game. But I would say I'm impressed by how they've done it here. It's not quite perfect, because I think anyone who's done karting will agree that you really rely on feel through the wheel and through the seat. And of course you don't get any sensation through your seat unless you've got some sort of motion rig, but even that wouldn't really give you everything. But the problem I think it has is that the force feedback is actually fairly weak at the moment. So you know, all the feeling you get is through the wheel in of course a simulator, but I wasn't really getting too much. So the way I kind of drove the car isn't how I drive a real car as such. I was kind of drive in a way that kind of just worked in this game, not so much in reality. So some of the corners are not quite smooth, and it was actually hard to be really millimetre precise as it might be in an X30 with proper slick tyres. You can like really glide through some of these corners, and you see it's really difficult to really be pinpoint accurate in this game because of the lack of feel in the simulator. Now this chain, I'm not an expert, but I'm pretty sure that kart shouldn't be moving if that chain is flapping around as it is there. We're going to move to the second track in the game. So there's 3 tracks. This one is Geelong, or Geel, I don't know how to say it. So we can do some laps around here. So the developer of the game is based in Australia, and 2 of the circuits in the game are Australian, which would probably explain why, the fact that they are based in Australia. And so we're going to go for some laps around here. So one thing I did notice is the speed. There's sort of there's this factor on an option on project cars where you can change the dampening of the speed. So the steering would react differently at different speeds, and I think this game could kind of do with that. So I felt like sometimes at slow speed the kart would just massively understeer despite turning in quite sharply, but then at high speed you turn the same amount and it would just completely oversteer. So the difference in the speeds was kind of a bit weird, especially in that turn at PF. You go over the bridge and then you turn right, the car would just understeer massively, and the car, it didn't feel like I was going in too fast. It just wouldn't steer. I just had to turn so much more than I had to, really. There is problems with understeer and oversteer. Like, you really are driving a fine line. I felt like it felt quite tricky to really put the kart through the corners, because it's a weird one, because in reality of course a kart is very twitchy, and if you just went full lock to the left you could like do a 180 on the spot, but in the game it felt really hard to actually simulate like a sharp turn and just actually pinpoint the kart through the corner. Like sometimes I was getting it dead right, but it's really difficult to really get the kart to kind of react exactly as I would have liked. But I think with any simulator, you do really need to tone your settings to match exactly what you like. You see they're going over the curb. The curb's not really a place where you want to be on this game. Of course, in reality, you can take curbs, and with the sensation you get through the wheel and the seat, you can kind of react easily. But here it's quite difficult, so I think you kind of want to avoid the curbs in this game. Unlike you might in reality, some curbs, of course, you would want to avoid completely. But there was a point on that the speed dampening was a bit weird. It could be changed, I felt. Sometimes I couldn't feel as if the kart was in a slide. Sometimes through some corners, you kind of, in a real kart, you might kind of turn the wheel, the kart would sort of glide through the corner. So you have an initial turn in, and then you hold the wheel straight almost, and the kart will kind of glide through the turn. It was really hard to judge if the kart was sliding or not. Sometimes the kart wouldn't feel as though it's sliding, and then I'm on the throttle to get out of the corner, and then it will just oversteer because I'm actually sliding and I'm just powering an oversteer. But that was the end of my time here at this circuit, and I smashed into the wall in the pits, and the crowd went absolutely ballistic. As you can see here, they went wild. They literally could not contain themselves. As we move to the third circuit. This was a really cool track. I'd love to go to Australia and drive this one day. Very, very tricky to get right. I'd love to come here, maybe give it a go in reality. Lots of different types of corners here. But what I would say, even with all this maybe criticism, but just feedback, I suppose, this game is really fun. I really enjoy playing this. It's not quite. It doesn't really quite feel like reality. I don't think a simulator can ever quite feel like a real thing, unless you're in a really expensive rig or something. But I really enjoyed this. Just the challenge of going around, just trying to work out what works and what doesn't work, trying to get that lap time down. I found it really fun, and it was something I did loads of laps. You can see here I'm on lap 14. So I've gone around here for like 10 minutes. I got really into it. I think it's something you have to you get really immersed into it, and you almost forget where you are. I was just going round and round and round, really just trying to set some personal best sectors and lap times. It's actually really amazing. So my best lap times, just in case you're wondering, if you want to maybe compete a little bit, PF was like a 59.8, Geelong 33.3, and this circuit GKCV 42.6 or 42.5, which we've just done there. So if you want to compete against them sometimes, you can have a go against those. I don't think, it's decent lap times, but there's definitely a lot better lap times. There's some lap times out there which are like 3-4 seconds quicker than what I've done. So it's really hard to kind of hook up a lap precisely, exactly as you'd like. But it is fun, as I say. I was having a lot of fun with this game, and I'd actually recommend buying it. If you're on the edge, it's only £14. It's good fun. It's not quite like reality, but I can definitely see lots of potential. Like for example, with the brakes, you might have just noticed as I went into turn 1, I think 2 laps ago. If you get on the brakes at the right moment and stamp on them, you can kind of use it to pivot into the turn, and it felt really nice when you got it right. I did have to turn my brake amount down to 90 though to really get that effect. So this is a bit of chase cam. Being the chase cam controller peasant I am using a wheel here, of course, though. Had to try out the chase cam, of course, and it works pretty well. There are actually a range of views that you can use here. I'm really impressed again by the offering they've given. It was quite hard to really be precise. Again, you see the chain on the bottom line. This was the view you may well have seen on the trailer that was released like a week or two ago. Really hard to drive in this view though, as obviously it's moving, so your reference points are like completely screwed over. Really hard to drive in this view, but it does look spectacular, and again it really highlights the level of detail, as does this view of the stub axle. Just looks really nice. The detail, I'm really impressed by the detail they've gone into. I think it's clear that the developers, or the developer, they're into karts. They understand the detail behind the karts, and they've modelled it really well. And I'm impressed by it overall. For such a small developer to make this level of detail, I am definitely impressed. It's something that I don't think even like the really big game makers could really improve upon too much, especially in terms of like the handling. I think it is hard to get right. It's not quite accurate, and I might not be driving completely true to real life, but for any underground enthusiasts, they have this viewpoint, so you can see under the ground. Not quite sure why that's useful. You can see the chain flapping about on the right hand side as well, and that's not particularly useful at all. It's a bit of a weird view, to be honest. Get a view of the rear end of the car, and then of course you have the main cockpit view. So into the menus you have like leaderboards. So it's good implementation of the leaderboards here. The guys, some guys around the Geelong track got like 10 seconds quicker. So I think there might be some sort of loophole or something where they can cut part of the track and it stays clean for them. And here's some of the karts. The detail again. Really impressed by the detail. The look of the kart is really well modelled, and you can see here, like as you highlight different parts of the kart, it's clear that they understand the detail of the karts. Some of the menus are a bit sort of nonsensical. So you can see here, like, okay, a stub axle on the Sodi kart, okay, and then you quit out, go back, and then like you go to the driver, choose something like my right boot. And then it's got some stub axles still down there. I don't know what's quite going on. I can change my boot for a stub axle. I don't know. And here are my settings, just in case you're wondering. So I'm using the Thrustmaster TX with the base, the 599XX Alcantara rim. There's my pedal settings. So I put the strength down to 90, which meant I could really stamp on the brakes and it wouldn't immediately spin. So you want to kind of tune that finely. So I really like to stamp on my brakes, so stamp on the pedal, and then at the maximum amount it kind of just begins to pivot the kart into the turn. So that's kind of the setting I like to use there. And if you want to copy the settings, then by all means, please do. Steering, I went for 270. You want quite a low rotation because of course the kart has a very low rotation, only like 180 degrees, so you don't need much rotation. I think 270 was the best for me. 180 felt a little bit too responsive. It was actually quite tricky, so I went for 270 instead and matched it of course on the wheel. And there are the force feedback settings, which would be one of my main criticisms so far. The force feedback is very weak. It didn't really tell me much, so I felt like I was driving the kart purely visually, just by what I was seeing rather than what I was feeling. And that's probably the main criticism. On balance, it's not quite like reality because you're not driving it through feel, you're driving it visually, and there's not much feel through the wheel. So that's my main point so far. But what I would say is that the game definitely has potential. It's not too much money to pick up. But let me know your thoughts on the game. I'd definitely like to know what everyone thinks of this. I think there's definitely potential, and I'm impressed by what they've done so far with such limited resources. But that's it for today. Thank you very much for watching as always. Let me know your thoughts. I shall see you next time. Goodbye.